Good evening, everybody. After a long absence due to objective and subjective reasons, let us attend episode 27 from Gospel of Violence podcast. We are back streaming live to multiple platforms. Thank you for all those joining us. Today's episode is quite special. We have a guest waiting in the background here. Me and Todd never met in person. We have not spoken much, but for a number of years I was aware that Todd dwells and teaches in a similar arena, integrating things instead of isolating things. And for a number of years, in our own way, we've been kind of outspoken about deterioration of our industry and how it's becoming, what would be the word I'm looking for, insecticized, like an insect specializing kind of thing. And so we'll be touching upon some interesting topics today. Hang around, share this live stream, invite people that might benefit from what we're going to be talking about. And before I bring Todd in, let's just do a very quick shout out to our sponsors. First, Ammo Supply Warehouse, purveyors of fine Freedom Seats. I don't have to explain to you what they do with the Freedom Seats, and you have a choice what you do with them. Fine people. Butch, dear friend of mine, brother in training, known him for many, many years. Look no further if you're looking for great service, good selection, ammosupplywarehouse.com. And the other sponsor we have is I cannot show you either any products because of restrictions during the live streams. Iron Pig Armament out of the great state of Florida, fine fighting tools in various calibers for good folks. You guys figure out what it means. Mainly it is AR based tools, 9, 5.56, and so on and so on. Check them out, Iron Pig Armament. Great product. I'm a proud owner of a few of the products from this fine gentleman. And last but not least, it's my wife's side hustle, Ford Honey Badger body sprays. You know where to find them. Go onto my website, go to the web store, and you'll find the product. With all that being out of the way, and without any further ado, I'm going to bring in our guest, Todd Fossey. Hello, Todd. How you doing?
Sonny, it's an honor to be here with you.
We appreciate definitely you dedicating some time to this. I don't know how long this is going to last. I'm probably going to be yelled at by my wife because I'm not going to be in time to help her to put our baby to sleep, but oh well, it is what it is. Folks, those of you who are watching, if you would please let us know sound and image if everything is okay with audio video, that would be appreciated. And then we'll start going with some questions and some some discussion with Mr. Todd Fossey. Sounds like audio video so far so good. Loud and clear, Sam Russell says. All right, Todd.
Yes, sir.
Welcome for the first time to our little podcast. This is not anything big. I'm not trying to make it wildly commercially successful. From the get go, the idea behind this was that I want people that are dedicated to seek the truth, regardless of, without being restrained by some kind of loyalties to the system, to some guru, to some dogma, that are open-minded enough to kind of expand their views, even if it goes outside their current beliefs. And again, watching and following you for quite some time, I'm like, yeah, this would be probably the guy to have a discussion about topics of such nature. If you don't mind, if some of our viewers are not familiar with who you are, what you do, your company in the integrated defensive solutions, right?
Strategies.
Strategies. Sorry about that.
It's
IDS.
okay. It's okay.
Yeah. So if you can really quickly just go over, a little bit of how you came to this place where you teach people, where you're seeing things wrong in our industry and you're trying to do your things, and what is your background? I know it's not just fighting arts. I know you've done some things in like, unfortunately for me as well, in Hollywood, and you've done some consulting and you've done some coaching in other areas. So if you can really quickly catch
Yeah.
up some people to speed.
It's my least favorite thing to do when I come on a podcast is talk about myself, but I know it's important. But I know it's important. Part of it, I think, is because it's been such an unusual path. As you know, the Lord can take you in unusual directions to lead you to a very specific place that He wants you to go. I started studying motor learning, skill acquisition, and human performance at the age of 10. I wasn't a normal kid. I did it for my own reasons. I thought it was for sports performance at the time, but it's led me to some other places. But I ended up becoming a Division I athlete, and largely because of the research and the studies that I had been doing and how I had been applying it to myself. And I was actually coaching my friends at a young age. And while I was at college, it was a top 20 track and field program where I was at. I was a high hurdler, which is a very technical event. I was studying behavioral sciences at the University of Northern Iowa, and several of the other Division I athletes came to me and asked me if I would start to coach them on these things that I would talk about. So I did. By the time I was 19, 20 years old, I already had 10 years of experience. The university didn't like that very much because I didn't have a PhD or a master's degree. And so I shot back at them and said, you can't tell me that I'm not allowed to talk with my friends. In reality, I had more experience than they did with all of their egghead antics, coming out of the classroom. So I had real world application. And this, a little bit of a side note here. I remember when I first started studying psychology, and I had a professor who used the term applied psychology. And I asked him, I asked him a question because I didn't understand. I said, you mean that not all psychology is applied? That sounds really stupid. So long story short, along those lines, I turned it into a profession, and I ended up working with many of the top performers in the world when it comes to athletics, other forms of performance, on camera, on stage, pianists, a wide variety of different types of performance. And I ended up coaching them and consulting in the area of skill acquisition and motor learning. So I've been at this for a long time, and I stay on it. I stay on top of it. What the latest research is, I'm talking about in the last 6 months. And so when I was going through my traditional training in firearms, combatives, martial arts, I knew that they didn't understand what this science was, and that the overwhelmingly, almost exclusively, the lens through which they were approaching these topics came from lore, tradition, and intuition, and they didn't have any real grasp at all on what the science was and what I call a neurocognitive ecological framework. When I started to get into this industry, I very quickly realized that I had to go, if I was going to do this ethically, I had to go down a different path. So I locked myself in my office. And I told my wife, I'm not coming out. I'm going to forget everything that the industry does, both in the area of martial arts, combatives, and firearms. And I'm going to pour over data and research that I know to be factual. And then I'm going to pursue the truth. And what's going to come out is going to come out. And I did that. And when I looked at what I had, I was a little bit nervous because I was worried that nobody was going to understand what I had and what I was going to do. But I started to post some things on social media, things that I was writing, things that I was doing with training, and people would say that's what I want. That's I can. They couldn't articulate it, but they knew that they were recognizing things that were missing in their experience. And so from that, long story short, Integrative Defense Strategies was born, and Integrative Defense Strategies is exactly what it says it is. There's no semantic games being played there. Integrative Defense Strategies. We integrate multiple disciplines and multiple modalities and places that people might not even think about, so that we can have an adaptable approach to dealing with violence of all different types.
Okay, well, that sounds definitely probably a little bit provocative to some more like what we would say traditionalists, both in the martial arts community and definitely firearms community. So I want to ask you before we move on, because you mentioned a couple of things when you were describing some of the fields of your studies, where you were talking that most training was either done, lore or tradition or intuition. Do you completely discount intuition? I'm not asking about the other two. I'm asking about intuition specifically.
No, I don't completely discount it. Not at all.
Okay.
Especially when there is a background that's been built with empirical science, right? So there's definitely a place for intuition. It's kind of like the balance between art and science, right? Music is both an art and a science at the same time.
Indeed.
So intuition is definitely a part of it, but I like to make sure that the intuition is backed by something empirical.
Okay. All right. I wanted to clarify that because I had over years had long, many discussions with people, how would I say it softly without offending too many folks? Although people watch me, they kind of used to stuff like that. There's a lot of pseudoscience out there. A lot of folks will use big phrases, $1 million words, and you read some of their stuff and you kind of go like, dude, I know all of it is bullshit, but it's so impressive. I'm actually going to subscribe to it, because you're using words that, the professors, the ones that tell you that you haven't earned your PhD, thus you don't know shit. Or some guys with multiple black belts, they go like, you can't fight. And then you look at those guys and you go, oh, sure. Or the grandmasters of competitive shooting. Examples go on and on and on. I forgot what's the English word for that is, where people cite their resumes and CVs as some kind of empirical proof of their competence.
Yeah, it's a pseudo eminence is what it is.
Yeah, and I kind of find it funny.
Believability and truth aren't the same thing, right? There's a lot of things out there that are believable, but they're not truthful. And you can be a magician at a magic show, right? And we're living in an age when not just in I consider myself to be outside of the industry. I've gone rogue for many reasons, but even so, I think that it's really important that we're seeking truth at all costs, because we're not in an industry where the customer is always right, And we're not selling barbecue sauce. We're talking about life and death topics. And so this isn't a place where we want to pretend. We need to make sure that we're challenging each other's thesis, because that makes us better, and that we're challenging our own thesis at the same time, that we're constantly looking for ways to disprove our own theories, so that we're not in our own echo chamber.
Yeah, so one of my students, Clem, actually reminded me. Funny enough, he's French that speaks with very, very heavy French accent, but there he is reminding me of English word what I was trying to look for is credentialism. Where a lot of
Credentialism, got it.
yeah, where a lot of people throw that stuff, and we've seen it in places like very big shows like Sean Ryan show, and with some of our quote unquote heroes of our country throwing that stuff because I was in this unit, I was with these people. Thus, you should not question my opinion. Shut up. What do you know? Where is your paper from this university or that unit or whatever? So, all right, Todd, let's dig into some stuff. Integration. How? Not how. More importantly, I guess, why did you see, especially in the context of the country we live in, United States, integration of combatives with firearms skills and other things, understanding
Yeah.
psychological metrics, understanding even to a certain degree, and I would suggest to a large degree, our emotional realm and other things. Just doing push-ups and running 100 yards before you pick up the gun, it's not integration. It's in the way it is still range theatrics. Just physical stress does not duplicate what people call combat stress, right? So why did you arrive you know at this risky area of integrating, for at the very least, two fields that are very, how would I say, they are very dogmatic. In martial arts, people go like, I don't need no gun, I can do this. Gun people are stupid, they have no skills, they depend on carrying some plastic and metal to defend themselves. In gun industry, dudes will go like, why would I need to know how to do the triangle or this or that, because I have this here by 45, and it won 2 world wars. you know that kind of, well, I'll call it what it is, ignorance. So why?
Can I show you real quick? This is our Venn diagram,
Yes.
IDS Venn diagram. We've got firearms, combatives, decision-making, psychology, use of force, tactics, legalities, and skill acquisition on the Venn diagram. And of course, there's much more to it. But just to create a simple Venn diagram, it's a difficult question to answer because it's a non-linear answer, right? And we're living in a linear world. And the majority of human beings, I'll just say this, they get uncomfortable with unlinear processes because most minds aren't equipped to deal with a nonlinear process. But I'll do the best I can to answer the question. Another analogy that I'll use on why it's difficult to answer the question is like trying to describe a sphere to somebody that lives in a two-dimensional reality. And while I'm having conversations, that goes through my mind a lot, where I'll be talking about things that are multidimensional. I'll just use a sphere circle analogy, and they'll say, I love circles. Circles are great. That makes a lot of sense. Now, in my mind, I'm saying, no, I'm talking about a sphere. I'm not talking about a circle. And they say, yeah, the circles are great, So it can be really, yeah.
Hold on a second. I don't know if it's just me, but your audio started kind of glitching a little bit.
Check 1 2, check 1 2.
Sounds good. Sorry to interrupt you. We just started.
No, that's okay. But the place that I feel like I need to start is by saying it's very difficult for me to understand how they can ever be considered separate. They are absolutely and utterly indivisible in my experience, and interdependent. They depend on one another and they can't be separated. They should not be separated. They should not be separated. And if they are, then you're working in a system that's fractured and fragmented, and it isn't integrated into a holistic system. And that's what we want. The reason why, the next thing that comes to mind in terms of the reason why, is because the data suggests that's what we need, not necessarily what we want, but what we need. And when I say that, I'm talking about violent crime statistics. Now, I'm not talking about the statistics of shootings. I'm talking about the statistics of what's of different types of assaults. That's what I'm talking about, assaults versus shootings. When you remove the gang warfare statistics from shooting statistics, you see very quickly that the overwhelming percentage of violent crimes are ambush style attacks that are happening at contact distance. If they start at distance, at any distance at all, really, it's a luxury. Let's take a look at simple assaults. Depending on which data set you're looking at, somewhere between 65 and 80% of all assaults are simple assaults. Well, what are simple assaults? They're punches and kicks and scratches, right? They're slaps, right? And what distance are those taking place at? Now the assault starts as a simple assault, but they see or feel that you have a firearm on. Do you think they're going to fixate on that firearm? Yeah, they don't want you to use it on them, or they want to use it on you, right?
Yeah.
And then we take a look at the overwhelming majority of aggravated assaults when those statistics are removed. First, it's going to be personal weapons that are also kicks and punches or multiple attackers that have been taken too far, right? And then after that, it's going to be blunt force trauma and then edged weapons. And then even farther down the list, the distant next is going to be firearms. And even most of those assaults with firearms are going to be ambushes at a really close range. So it only makes sense for us to be forced to integrate our combative skills with our firearm skills. And I mean that literally integrating them, right? Context dictates strategy. So if that's the context that we're in, I mean, there's a good chance you're probably working with your hands and your firearm at the same time, not just while it's holstered, but also while it's in your hand. So they truly are indivisible, and all the other disciplines that I mentioned too are automatically baked into the cake. They're blended. They're not layered. They have to be blended when you understand how neuropsychology works and how encoding works in different structures within the brain. And that's a different conversation. But I'm happy to answer any specific questions that people have. I lectured at medical schools for 15 years on that topic, so there's no place that I can't go on that conversation. But when you understand how the whole works, you understand that it has to be integrated. And what the industry does is it sells the part as an independent whole. I say to people all the time, you can try to convince me the tip of my pinky finger is my whole body, but I know better. Right? You're conflating a lot of different things because you need to confirm your bias, or you need to build your bias around the skills that you don't have. Right? And so we do not compromise when it comes to that topic.
Okay. Definitely, I don't have any kind of like throw the devil advocate kind of comment or whatnot at it, because I've been going down this road since early days. I grew up in former Soviet Union. Uh, you know, firearms were not per se easily accessible, although if you wanted, you could have it, and I had it at illegal age in the country where it was completely illegal. And so, as far as integration of different skill sets, it definitely, you know, at a very early age, I realized that this is just reality. It's as simple as that. Later, as I got a little bit less stupid, you start looking at other things that you mentioned, and this is something that over the years now, endless discussion with traditional shooting instructors and apostles of competitive shooting, that is just never ending. Like, why you guys do certain things that induce stress, why you guys do things in training that are risky. And I go like, well, firearms are inherently risky, so is the violence. Now, for me to satisfy some kind of a arbitrary included rule that this is not to be done because it possesses risk. Mind you, that risk is less than you driving to the grocery store, because you're probably more likely to get into accident doing that. But you try to explain that there is a psychological component. There is something that does not have per se very easily defined and clear black and white metric what it is to point a weapon at somebody or close to somebody. What it is fear of death. You know, They go like, I've been punched in the face. I go like, it's not the same. When someone pulls the blade out in front of you, you cannot tell me that this is purely physical environment anymore, because it does have certain dimensions that, their square range, hit the target in the bill drill so fast metrics, they don't really cover it. And
I'm going to, I apologize for interrupting you. I think there might be a
no,
little bit
no,
of a delay. My apologies. Um, I have some science here that I'd like to share with the audience tonight about that. As you know, I like to bring the receipts.
yes,
So I'd like to share some things that are not of my opinion. That's what the industry, another thing that the industry does, they sell their relative preferences as absolute truths. So do you mind if I read something here? Cognitive bias. The whole industry, really what it is, it's a parasitic illusion is what it is. If I was going to summarize it, that's what I would say. And so I like to stick to the facts as possible. While I appreciate and I love the art side of what we do, I'd just like to share something because it's really a system of an agreed upon system of lies is what it is. And it's agreed upon system of cognitive biases. So there's something that everyone at home can look up. It's called the system justification bias. It's also known as the status quo bias. And it says it's the tendency to defend and bolster the status quo. Existing social, economic, and political arrangements tend to be preferred and alternatives disparaged, sometimes even at the expense of individual and collective self-interest. So even when they know and they acknowledge that this is something that's better for myself and better for my students, they won't do it. And if you think about it, what they do, there's actually a lot of research also that shows that the more popular somebody is in a particular field, the less reliable their information is. And what they've done is they painted themselves into a corner because they painted themselves as a god with a capital G, by the way. They painted themselves as a god with a capital G, and they painted themselves into a corner because they believe that everything that they say is gospel. And so they haven't allowed themselves any room for anything outside of what they've taught and what they've said. So when new information comes along that's humiliating to them, and it's going to damage their pocketbook, and it's going to be a narcissistic injury for them because it's an industry that's run by psychopaths and malignant narcissists. I'm talking about overwhelmingly. In my opinion, there's two extremes in the industry. There are altruists and there are psychopaths and malignant narcissists. And the altruists are, I'm talking about a fraction of a percent. I'm talking about the overwhelming majority. If the audience wants to look up at home the list of criteria for psychopaths and malignant narcissistic personality disorders, look it up in the DSM-4, look up the cluster Bs, all of that. I was a psychotherapist for 15 years. I know these things, right? That's what they are. If you want to look that up at home, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. And you'll understand why this system justification bias is so vehemently enforced, because the moment that Toto pulls back the curtain on the great and powerful laws, that now the jig is up, and all the bullshit that they've taught and made up over the years no longer has any value at all. And now the public will be awake, and they'll start to seek real truth, and they'll start to seek out instructors that have taken true alternatives with the sole interest of the preservation of life. The dollar and the ego isn't the number one for the altruist. The preservation of life and building God's kingdom here on earth is their mission. And I'm telling you, they are, for those at home who haven't experienced it yet, that's a very rare person in this industry.
so one of our listeners made a comment, almost sounds like having a God complex, and I just wanted to add to it. There is a saying that those who have no God in the heart, they act godlike in their minds. And I noticed on a couple occasions now in our relatively short conversation so far, you did mention faith. I also know for a fact, in our industry, there's a number of folks that claim to be Christians, and I'm in no place to question it. It's
But you are in
their
a place to discern.
yes, discernment is something I think that in the scriptures is it's held in pretty high regard, pretty much as a requirement for Christ followers. So, you know, I started in my classes saying to people, and I'm going to start doing it regular before starting the class and a few times reminding during the class, is to start with the phrase that Christ is in our midst. And that refers to not trying, trying very hard not to act like industry teaches and almost implores us to act with that narcissistic, attitude that you spoke about. I notice so many people, instead of offering, like we having a conversation now, some kind of a value in their explanations. This is what I understood. This is what I discovered. By the way, this is not the end of my knowledge. I'm on the path. You know, discernment between facts and the truth, because you can throw a lot of facts out there that does not make it a truthful statement.
No,
There is a saying.
there's a lot of selection bias, right? The
Absolutely.
cherry picking of data, right? That supports their false narrative.
There's a saying that the devil deals in facts, but not the truth. And I think that's something that people should
Mm.
spend some time and reflect on that, because it's pretty damning statement. And from what I observed, it's true. From what I observed, it's true. So
And it's usually the people that are the most believable. The people who are the most, I would say in this industry, the people who are the most revered and the most popular and the most respected um, tend to be the most deceptive.
okay, that's interesting point you're making, and I was gonna come back to that, because you mentioned something earlier when you said that in this industry we should not apply, the common capitalist mindset that customer is always right. And I 100% agree with you. Actually, if there is scientific way to be more than 100%, that would be it. uh, it's been a year adventure, but I'm finally in the last throes of finishing my first book, and it's gonna be called "Don't Be a Shitty Student." And I know it's kind of offensive title, but I decided before I croak to put as much as possible to the paper and write some things that, within my training circle, within small circle of dedicated students, I noticed there's not much talk about it. So as the first project, I decided to do "Don't Be a Shitty Student." And it's funny you mentioned about not being, drawn into the whole thing that customer is always right. I don't look at students as customers, because I don't want to train them to become consumers, because the product that we offer is not really a product. Although we charge money, and that's just, it is what it is. Everything, it's exchange of value for value, the way I see it. But if we look at that trinity of guide, instructor, skills that he offers or knowledge that he shares, and then the student, the most decisive factor in that is student. If he's not a good student, if he's not receptive, he has no ears to hear, he's not able to challenge himself, and he's not taught to do so. He's just there because he paid money, and we go like, here's my dry curriculum, I deliver it to you, you got your money's worth, get out of here. Oh, by the way, I love you, I hope to see you again. Right? And I see that in industry a lot. And would you say that a lot of industry is actually grooming people coming for training to become consumers, not students, but consumers?
Almost exclusively. It's retail. It's what I call retail training.
I was hoping you're going to throw some, more encouraging thing into this, but, you know, I kind of asked that question knowing that you're probably going to confirm. So it
Do
was
you
not really a
mind
question.
if I build off of what you said a little bit?
Sure.
And I'm looking forward to reading your book. By the way, I just finished my first book too. It comes out next year, so I look forward to doing an exchange with you.
Awesome.
Um, um, I hear students say all the time, and I see it posted online all the time, that so and so is a great instructor. martial arts, combatives, firearms training. They're such a great instructor. So my question for them is, how do you know? How do you know? Let me offer a little bit of context here. And everything that I say is for the audience's consideration. I encourage everyone to think critically, and that includes everything that I say, and I pray that none of my words cause anyone to stumble. I'm curious, out of 1 million instructors, by the way, there's a difference between an instructor and a coach. An instructor is a presenter, and a coach is somebody who cultivates skill over time and cultivates human beings over time. Almost all instructors are nothing more than presenters. And my question is, out of 1 million instructors, how many of them have spent a meaningful amount of time actually researching and studying the science of skill acquisition and motor learning? Out of 1 million. Probably 5. I say one hand, or maybe even less, out of 1 million. They maybe have read an article, they maybe have read a blog post, maybe even a whole book, right? But chances are that even the book that they read on motor learning was grossly outdated and was spun on a bias from another coach or another instructor, and that almost none of it was based on prime sources and real empirical research. And if there was opinion in there, they probably weren't distinguishing the difference between their opinion and what the facts were, and they were probably blending them as they went. So if there are fewer than 5 or fewer instructors out of 1 million who have real knowledge and application in the science of motor learning and skill acquisition, and for the force sciences too, by the way, and the statistics around violent crime, integrating all of those things together, including combatives and everything that we've already talked about, if there are fewer than 5, then how many students out of 1 million?
It's not encouraging numbers.
No, it's not, but that's why we're having the conversation. I think, right? It takes that handful of renegades out there that aren't interested in validation from the masses, that are interested in the pursuit of truth for the sake of truth, because it's the truth that will set us free, that will ultimately lead to from 5 to 10, and then exponentially grow from there until we reach a new tipping point, until it becomes commonplace to speak the truth. And now we've created an entirely new paradigm in training. And that's what my goal is, and I'm sure yours is too, a whole new paradigm. And integrity is, I was having a conversation with one of my students recently, and he said, but we were talking about integrity, and he said, but isn't integrity a part of the new paradigm? His name is Kyle McKay, by the way. If he's watching, he gets credit for that. And I said, yes, that's an excellent way to put it. Integrity should be on that list, on that Venn diagram. And none of us has the ability to be 100% integral all the time, because we're flawed and we're human. But we can come pretty close.
And also, that's one of the things, when I say don't be a shitty student, that does not apply only to student that comes, because every single one of us that teach, we should remain perpetual students as well.
That's right.
So not being a shitty student would apply also to all of us instructors. And that's very important.
More so.
Well,
the standard, the expectation is higher for us.
As I was talking to my spiritual father, Father Barry in our Orthodox church here, he goes, when I meet Creator, I'm going to be judged by different standard, because he's going to ask me, how did you lead your flock?
Yes, sir.
How did you mislead them? He goes, so my word have, especially words that are not true, they have different gravity than just the word.
Yes, sir.
And I think that should apply to us in this industry, because like you said, we're not talking about some product. We're talking about something that within split seconds sometimes may make a difference between dad coming back to see his daughter or not. And that's not a light something to joke about.
Or prison in a country where lawfare is coming against good people who are 100% justified to defend themselves. Do you mind if I jump off on this a little bit to
Sure.
educate the public just a little bit on some of the things that I'm talking about? If I can break down what's called the skills continuum. I wish I had 5 days to teach everybody these things, but I'm going to do the best I can to create a kind of a skeletal structure. And these things won't be my opinion. I'm talking about a skills continuum where it's the environment that skills are learned in and the environment that skills are performed in. So I want the audience to sort of draw that correlation between the environment they're learned in and the environment that they're performed in. Okay. There are basically 4 different categories of skills environment for learning and performance. And the first one is a predictable environment where things are choreographed, right? Like figure skating, for example, would be a predictable environment, and they're scored based on well, first of all, it's quantified somehow, subjectively quantified, which is really strange. Violence isn't quantifiable, by the way. It's a qualitative experience, but that's another a little bit later, maybe in our conversation. So there's a predictable environment where people are learning and performing at the same time in a way that's predictable, and it's valued based on precision and beauty and aesthetics. And the next one is semi-predictable, where there are some random elements, but the random elements are very few, and they're actually fairly predictable, like a target that goes back and forth. That's semi-predictable, right? And it's also decontextualized. We'll get to that later too. Then there's the unpredictable learning and performance environment where things are random, which is violence. There are no 2 violent encounters that are the same. They're completely unpredictable, right? And there are no 2 people that are the same at the same time. The variables are unpredictable and unrepeatable. They're at all times. And then there's the very dynamic performance and learning environment. So it's both unpredictable and it's very dynamic, and it's happening at a high rate of speed. And that's the most accurate one when it comes to violence. So when we talk about the firearms training world, and in a large part combatives and martial arts, what they're doing is they have students that are learning and performing in a predictable environment. So technically, in terms of the science of skill acquisition and motor learning, what's happening in reality is those are categorized as 2 completely different skill sets. They're not even categorized as the same thing.
Okay. So I do have somewhat of a question here that before any of the viewers jump on it, I figure I'm going to do the preventive measures here. In the process of learning, do you, within your methodology, separate attributes? And I hate to use word training because it's not training. It's more like attribute rediscovery and development versus skill.
Can you be more specific with the question?
Yeah. So skill can be, a good jab, right? Person throws a good jab. It has nice geometry. It has structurally sound shoulder where it needs to be, elbow not hyperextends too early. Everything is biomechanically, geometrically, from the metrics of science, visible science, everything is good, right? What I mean by attributes is while everything aesthetically looks correct, someone with a deeper look can look at it and go like, hey dude, somewhere lower within your structure, your alignment of your spine was such that it could have induced extra tension, in your posterior shoulder. That could have induced this, and that may affect your timing, that may affect your acceleration, that may make it more predictable or visible or any of those things. So what I mean by attributes is not just physical attributes as far as your physical condition, not having excess tension, but also something a little bit deeper. We had a number of classes here lately where we talked about, there's a cognitive recognition. No matter how much you train, it takes time. Our nervous system recognizes things pretty much on the spot immediately. If you touch something hot, before you realize it's hot, your body already has reacted. correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So the way I look at the deeper level of attributes, it's actually rewiring of a nervous system in a
Yes.
certain way,
Yes.
instead of strictly shutting it all down and relying strictly on people go like, well, I can see it, so it's cognitively I can understand, relate to it, write it down, put the formula to
Well,
it, draw a graph.
let me do the best I can to answer that scientifically. Um, what what is called is action perception coupling, where the skill development and the skill application are happening simultaneously. The old paradigm says that skill development should happen first, and then after you develop the skill, you should learn to apply it. But the research doesn't support that at all. The research strongly suggests that they should be happening simultaneously immediately. That doesn't mean that that particular skill or attribute development can't be isolated. It can be, and in my opinion, and I think the research supports that too, it should be isolated at the right time so that we can go through a process of refinement. And I think that's one of the big mistakes that is made, is that people are looking for perfect repetitions right away, where that actually violates the laws of neuropsychology, because what happens at first is that students go through a process of called neurological exploration. So it's called a neurogenesis, where dendrites are reaching out all over the place and they're trying to find the pathway, but it's really sloppy and inaccurate. And then from there, the brain goes through a process called synaptic pruning, where it starts to prune away the synapses that don't need to be there because they're inefficient, and wants to apply those neurological resources to the things that are the most important. And it wants to start to build myelination, those long-term neural pathways, those long-term neural nets. So that's the process. And that actually takes time. And when you don't allow that student to wayfind and go through the process of failure is a biological requirement for competence to even occur, the right kind of failure. If you're going for perfect repetitions right away, what you're doing ultimately is you're slowing down their learning process. And I have a whole bunch of stuff that I'd like to share with the audience about that today, in a slightly different way, but just sort of create the framework. And so I believe that in my opinion, the research supports both of those things happening at the same time in different ways, through a scientifically structured training design. We can accomplish both.
You know, this answer of yours already opened three separate highways for me to go on. And, when I started to see that you yawning, or you're looking over your shoulder because your family is calling you, then we'll quit. But this may turn out to be a little bit longer podcast than an hour. So you were talking about learning the skill and applying the skill, right? Uh, over the past couple of years, I started seeing in social media space and some other places, because I do interact with a lot of people of different backgrounds, not just people that do similar things to me, which is very few people do similar things to me, but I still talk to people that do things differently. I don't consider them, enemies, competitors, or whatnot. We are seekers. Now, I have no problem pointing something out that someone is moving not well. I have no problem pointing out that someone is, he has a model of aesthetic seduction. I call aesthetic seduction when
Mhm.
someone gets very, very good at something, like he has this one little horse that he knows that everybody goes, wow, when he does maybe a double leg takedown because of his speed, athleticism, or whatnot. You can almost see on person's face like he's having an orgasmic experience because he's showing his very best. This is where he shines. This is where he does, right. And so I was looking, and I asked you in one of my messages, I believe yesterday, about ecological jujitsu. When I first time heard about it, I'm like, that sounds like people that go and hug trees and don't like capitalism, and they probably hate me for all for all the gas guzzling vehicles that I drive. But anyway, I got from the get go where they're going with it, and I started reading about things, and then I spoke to a few people about it. And from where I stand, to me, it was funny because I kind of pointed at it, and they go like, "So basically, what they're doing is," and I know a lot of people will laugh about it, is our methodology defined by more scientific words, but we do the same thing within the Russian system.
Mhm.
It's very much applied skill development. So it's not isolated as, singular punch, do repetitions. And I hate word repetitions. I tell my students, I don't want you to do 100 repetitions. I want you to do 100
Can I
experiments.
can I just inject really quick? And I apologize. I want to just say this really quick because I think
Sure.
it'll pay off later. And I want you to complete your stream of consciousness. The research shows, and something that we're really into and that we found great results with, is what we call repetition without repetition. So there's contextualized variability. So there are no two repetitions when we're working against live resistance in a way that is constraint led. What happens is there are no two repetitions that are the same, so that we can learn to be adaptive. That's that action perception coupling. And that we can learn to couple our problem solving with our motor skills. And that's actually what I'm talking about. So the encoding is actually happening simultaneously. Your brain is learning to encode how to solve the problem through what's called a movement solution,
Mhm.
right? And the best way to do that, in my view, and I believe the research strongly supports it, I have some of it here actually with me, some studies here with me. That's the best way to tackle that, especially when we have a high volume of repetition without repetition in a very short amount of time.
So I tell my students this story because they're asking me about my experiences when I was chosen to be in with a special group of people in Soviet military. They go like, "So how did you guys learn to shoot?" So I tell them the story of certain major. Uh, we went to the range uh, called Polygon in Russian, the Polygon, and he told me to go down range where the targets are. And I'm going like, okay, so he's gonna have me adjust some targets and things like that. So I'm about 50 meters down from him. He goes, turn around. I'm like, so I turn around. He raised his AK and he yelled, move as if you want to live. And he started firing. Now I know he wasn't firing at me. He was firing close to me. But boy, was I moving. And there was no repetition in there. You know what I mean? It was non-cognitive. It was strictly chaotic. And at first, it was probably extremely inefficient, but it was fully dedicated. And then gradually, as we kept working, you know, number of days later, I was given unloaded firearm, and then he goes, "Do the same. Just try to kind of point it at me." And what was interesting, man, that nothing that I did there looked like, felt like what we see in the square shooting ranges. Not a single thing, not a single technique from USPSA, IDPA, anything else was in there. And I'm not talking, like, yeah, this one time. No, not a one time. So when I do my revolution, people go like, why you actually allow people to come to like force on force class because they've ever taken live firearm class with you? I go like, because this is where they're gonna understand not to fall into a trap over square range, framed, rot memorization technique. They're gonna try to box it for very
Well,
specific insect-like application.
I have several different. I could go on for hours jumping off on what you said, but it's actually two different kinds of memory. There's a declarative memory and a declarative memory and procedural memory. And rote
Yes.
memory is declarative, right? And kinesthetic memory is procedural. So what they're doing is they're preparing people for the wrong thing. They're preparing people for the wrong fight. And actually, the targets that they're up against are decontextualized and inert, right? There's no contextualized decision making that's happening at all. So in reality, they're not learning anything that's consistent with defending themselves or anybody else for that matter, which makes it exponentially more complicated. The decision making around defending somebody else isn't the same as it is defending yourself. I'm going to jump ahead to something, if you don't mind, because I think
Sure.
this is the best place to jump off. And here's some research from Rudd from 2020. If anybody wants to look it up, I like to bring the receipts with me, where he talks about what you're talking about in square static ranges. It's called reductionistic learning. Okay. In the West, all of our learning for the last 70 years has all been reductionistic. Okay. So people don't understand how to learn outside of that unless they've maybe gone to a Montessori school or something like that. But even then, they probably didn't realize or understand the philosophy about what their learning style was. But anyway, it wasn't reductionistic. Here's what Rudd says. He says, reductionism model takes away from the learning process. Rudd's 2020 research warns that the reductionist approach takes focus away from the learning process because it's through that process where students understand how to enrich self-organization within contexts. Reductionism doesn't offer that opportunity. The information poor environments, let me say that again, the information poor environments being presented as a result of reductionism are not providing students any relevant information to interact with. The information that students use to couple their movements to in the decontextualized drills isn't available for pickup in contextualized situations, thus is not helpful for learning. So the best basketball shooter in the world who has all the world records for shooting a basketball is terrible at playing the game of basketball because what he's doing is utterly and completely decontextualized.
It's funny you say that, Todd, because in every class I say that, if you make 100 out of 100 free throws, does not make you Michael Jordan. It does not
Not
make you
even
Michael Jordan.
close. Not even close. Shooting a basketball, by the way, shooting is a very small percentage of the game of basketball. One of my best friends is a high-level college basketball player, childhood friend, who did really well as a coach. It's a very small percentage of the game of basketball, but shooting a basketball when somebody's hand is in your face and you learn how to get open, you're on the move and you're taking that jump shot and there's all the pressure and everyone's watching and the game's on the line and all of those things. I already read it to you. That's literally categorized as a completely different skill set. Doesn't mean we can't stop and do shooting drills that help to refine our mechanics. It's not what I'm saying. I'm not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, but I'm not conflating two things that are not the same.
And
Apples and oranges are both fruit, but they're different fruit.
And I think there is actual danger. When we start teaching people, this whole conventional approach of, start with the basics. Here's your grip, here's your stance, here's your sides, here's your trigger finger movement. Let's say if talking about firearms, right? And then you frame it, and then they do this rote memorization techniques that trying to do the same thing without realizing that they're not doing the same thing because humans simply cannot repeat exactly the same thing twice.
No.
Impossible.
Well, there's a couple of different things, and I apologize again if I'm interrupting you. A couple of different things that come to mind there. The first one is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which we'll get to in a second, because ultimately what the industry does is it fans the flames of the Dunning-Kruger effect and it sells the Dunning-Kruger effect. That's what it does. It sells dopamine. It sells novelty. It sells Dunning-Kruger. But in terms of actual motor learning, there's an order in which human beings will learn motor skills. And the first thing that they'll learn will be a concept. They'll learn the concept of the motor skill. Then they'll learn the gross portion of the motor skill. Then they'll learn the fine portion of the motor skill. And then they'll learn the sensory portion of the motor skill, the sensory motor portion. So it starts with the biggest and it goes to the smallest is what happens. And the industry actually does it different. It starts with the sensory motor and then it works its way up to the biggest, most conceptual parts of it. Now, what happens under stress and when skills are being perished or when they're perishable, they actually are lost in the reverse order. Most people don't know this. I try to write about this a lot, but 70% of what you learn in a course is gone in the first 48 hours.
Absolutely. I use an example, and maybe, well, not maybe, it's certainly not a perfect example. Have you ever been to Salvador Dali Museum in St. Petersburg, Florida?
No.
So Dali was this
I know
I
who he
don't
is.
even know. Yeah,
I know Salvador Dali. Yeah,
like
I
yeah,
know who
like
he is. Yeah,
his paintings. You either have to be high on
yeah,
drugs or whatever, right?
yeah.
But some of them are like 20 feet by 30 feet, right? So I explain to people, I'm like, stand 1 foot away from that 20 by 40
That's
feet
right.
painting and look at one detail,
That's right.
and you thinking that you know what Salvador Dali is about.
That's right.
I said you have to step 100 feet, take in the whole picture, and then gradually you can realize the little touch, the little detail that he did to get that three-dimensional
But he
look
didn't
to it.
start with the details, did he?
No, no,
Just like sculptors, it's a process. We start with the big pieces, and then they slowly will refine it until they're polishing and rinsing and repeating. That's the idea,
yeah.
right? And in
So
terms of motor learning, the brain has to learn in a specific order
so I
to
wrote
maximize. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I wrote in my book, and it's written much better because my wife helped me to edit it for me to sound more smart. But I said something that you are an architect of your future. Now I didn't say electrician. I didn't say a bricklayer. I didn't say a I don't know,
Yeah.
any specialized things. You're an
Yeah.
architect. You have a vision, you have overall understanding of what it is, and then you can start going into certain things, like you said, extract and isolate certain skill, because now you understand where it fits in the
Yeah.
context, how it works in the big picture. You
Yes.
go like, all right, something here is lacking. I can fine tune my suspension. I can change a little bit the
Yeah.
compression in my turbo for the whole thing to perform better.
I use the same words in my book where I let instructors know that they're architects of training design. That's what they
That's
are.
that's interesting. As if we talked to each other before or something.
Yeah,
You
we
know.
never, and we never have.
No, we haven't.
Yeah, and there's so much more. There's so much more to it,
No,
you know. And one of the analogies that I like to use with my students, and I develop instructors and coaches too. That's mostly what I do actually, is develop instructors and coaches. I use this analogy where I say that as opposed to giving your students a collection of keys, teach them to be a key maker. So if you teach them the principles of defending themselves, then they have the adaptability to solve the problem on the fly in fluid and chaotic dynamic situations. So when the violence is happening, they don't have to go through that key ring to find the right combination of keys. They can make those keys on the fly. So it doesn't mean that we don't teach technique. That just means that we're primarily a principle-based approach. And then the techniques are secondary. So that way they can truly be adaptive to whatever their environments are. It's like we one of the things that we do is we put the problem first. We don't give the answer to the problem and then give them the problem and answer to a problem. We want to teach them how to do mathematics, it's not Common Core. We're not teaching to the test, and we're not giving them the answer before the problem. And so when they understand the principles of mathematics, now they can solve those very complex mathematical problems in real time. That's the idea.
So would you say what I asked about earlier, and we'll hopefully we'll get into it just a little bit, ecological jujitsu, right? So
Yeah,
like my
yeah,
understanding is that they do go somewhat in that direction. They don't teach first how to apply this or that. They go like, so here you are, back to the wall, hands around the neck, have a little bit of a playful time to understand the architecture, the feel of what this is, and then we'll play from there. And then gradually we actually may get to defining, refining specific, specific something within that flow, within that movement, within your problem solving capability, versus giving you, hey, here's the square peg, it goes into square hole
yeah.
once you find the square hole.
Right. There's no pre-choreographed fight sequences because then the bad guy's attacking you wrong. But
Right.
let's talk about the ecological absolutists when it comes to jujitsu. Something I've had to deal with a fair amount, by the way, and I've written about it some, so you know.
Okay.
Let me say this first. To be an absolutist in ecological dynamics is an oxymoron. So you can't be an absolutist, because the definition of ecological dynamics is to be adaptable to your environment. So if you're coaching, what that means is you're actually drawing from different types of coaching strategies based on what's happening in real time. So if you're an absolutist, that's the opposite of that. Does that make sense? They're actually contradicting themselves in real time. It doesn't make any sense. And what they've actually done is they're conflating terms. What they're actually describing is what's called constraint-led approach to learning, and they're calling it ecological dynamics. Jiu-jitsu and grappling in reality by itself is ecological. And they're just arguing about how, so when you're doing, say you're doing an open mat, and you're just doing free rolls, you're just open rolling, that by itself is ecological. And I'll prove it to you right now. I'm going to read to you the 8 different things that have to be present in order for ecological dynamics to occur. And by the way, it is the single most effective way to transfer and retain skill for motor skill. So I'm all about it, as long as we're intellectually honest about what it really is. Because what they've done is they've ruined the term ecological but dynamics by being so absolutist and they claim to be the anti-dogmatic institution while they're being dogmatic, right?
Haven't we seen that before elsewhere?
They're the new dogma. They're the new dogma. Okay, so let me put it to you like this. Here's the actual criteria. I have it written down. Okay, this is what I do. All right, 1, it has fidelity and it is dynamic. 2, it's functional, relevant, and principle-based. It's motivated by data specific to context. It should look like what you're actually going to be performing. 3, is alive, random, and unrepeatable. 4, we set the problem first, so the student learns to find their way to the answer. It's called wayfinding. 5, has a real resisting opponent. 6, perceptions dictate movements and movements dictate perceptions. There's that action perception coupling that I was talking about. 7, is constraint-led and scalable. And 8, skill development and skill application happen simultaneously. Okay, so when you're doing free rolls, that's what's happening. What they're actually talking about is the constraint-led approach, and they're calling it ecologically dynamic. And what that means is they're taking a slice of grappling, and they're creating parameters around things that forces the student to solve that problem.
So
And so
they're basically leading him to create a technique.
That's exactly right. And when it comes to self-defense, here's the thing, like with grappling, the context is already built in. The moment you walk onto the mats, that's the context. You're on the mats, you've got your gi on or your no gi, or you got your rash guard and your spats on, and you're touching hands, and here are the rules, and here's how you get points, and all that stuff, right? And it's more, the ecological approach is actually more valuable for what we do in self-defense, because we have to create the context. And the constraint-led approach is actually more valuable for what we do, because we can take pieces of the whole and we can isolate it into a way that is ecological with these different things that I was just reading to you, right? And so what they're actually doing is they're conflating. They're taking a constraint-led approach and they're calling it ecological, where grappling by itself is already ecological. Okay? And so it's a big problem. And what it does is it removes the experience that high-level coaches have to impart onto their students. Like, for example, some of your audience probably knows that my mentor and coach is Greg Nelson, one of the greatest combative minds who has ever lived, one of the greatest grapplers who's ever lived. He just got second in worlds at age 60, right? Yeah. And he hadn't competed for 24 years. And so I would be a fool if I didn't extract information and technique for how to solve the problem from him. Grappling is the oldest martial art. There's scratches on caves in the walls of grappling and wrestling techniques going back thousands of years. We would be foolish to not accelerate our learning by learning from these masters of jiu-jitsu and grappling. But as long we can have both at the same time. What they're saying is there are anti-prescriptive answers, and there's a time and a place for a prescribed answer, right? So we can have the best of both worlds. We can learn from people who have a much higher level of knowledge and skill than we do, while at the same time create a little bit of aliveness while we're drilling with a little bit of scalable resistance, so that we can have we can have the best of both worlds at the same time. Now, I'm a neurodivergent person, so I'm not here to bash on neurodivergence, but there are some people in the world of neurodivergence that are so black and white that they can't comprehend that there are minds out there that can do both at once, that can comprehend and apply both things at the same time. So we can create some aliveness, and as long as we're bookending it with the aliveness, with the real resistance, with a little bit of scalable problem solving, now we can extract from our teachers and we can learn it in a more effective way, but we can also have the aliveness where we're adding our own level of variability and problem solving to it at the same time. One of the examples that I gave to an expert in the world of motor learning, who, by the way, I argue with them too, okay, was this. I said this to him. I go, do you know what a gable grip is? No, you don't know what a gable grip is because you've never been on the fucking mats, okay? I'm like, this is a gable grip, okay? Do you know what happens when you tell a student to hit a gable grip? Has to be prescribed. Do you know how long it took Dan Gable to figure this shit out? You know what students will do? They'll lace their fingers. They'll just grab. They don't know how to do it. Plus all the other forms of grips, S grips. I drill this shit all the time, right? You know how long it takes? If an instructor can't be there to help prescribe some of those details that can make it that much more effective, you're doing your students and your grapplers and anyone else for that matter a disservice. So we can do both at the same time. And in many ways, the ecological absolutists in the world of grappling and everything else are doing the world a disservice.
I actually love the term ecological absolutist because that is such a, like you said, that's such an oxymoron of
It is.
itself. You go like ecological, to me, that word kind of like equivalent of natural flow of
Holistic.
holistic, right? It goes beyond IQ. It goes to actual intelligence. And that is ability to solve problems in real time. IQ is a lot of it is just, accumulated knowledge.
Yeah.
Intelligence, general intelligence, just like general athleticism, it's different than your weightlifting strength. It's different than, you know what I mean? It's a lot more, like I said, holistic in that sense.
Okay, yeah, because it's non-linear.
Well, I haven't seen too many things in life that are linear, except of studying geometry in school. So yeah, that was about it. All right. Yeah. A lot of people have a problem, Todd, they go like, and I try to define it, and I definitely defined it in the book from many angles, from many vantage points. But because of our industry the way it is, it's a consumer-based sales job. Anytime you say principle-based, they equate it to almost like, oh, these are fucking 60s, hippies from Oregon trying to be fa la 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 la, out there in the woods. Principles. What is that? It's some kind of energies, cosmic energies. And I go like, no. I mean, if you look even at something as limited as the dictionaries, definition of principle is kind of pretty straightforward what the principle is. Otherwise, in our faith, it would be referred to as a commandment. It's something that you cannot dissect any further, and it's kind of like the bottom from which the truth grows. It doesn't necessarily define the path where it goes, but it gives you the base. In Sistema, we try to explain to people like this. We don't teach you how to use GPS. We don't teach you how to use navigation system. We teach you how to read the map.
Mm-hmm. And in our industry, large portions of the map are missing and ignored.
I think most people have never seen the map.
No, they don't. They don't. And they wonder why we say that map is incomplete and it's not going to get you to your destination.
Or on your way there, you're going to get into traffic jam you cannot get out of because you don't know the alternative routes and you don't know how to find them either. And that's that learning while applying thing, right?
That's right. That's right. How are you going to solve that problem if your prescribed route isn't available?
Yeah. One of our readers has a question for you. Well, not a question, but more like a statement. He says, this guy sounds like he doesn't even know his bill drill time. It's our joke within our group because people go like, your competence is going to be judged by your, what's your best reps on the bill drill last time. And I have to admit, and it's a shame, but I only was explained what bill drill actually is about 4 days ago. I have no idea what bill drill is.
You can't quantify what isn't quantifiable, especially in a decontextualized environment. Again, you're comparing. It's an utterly and completely different skill set. I have something else I'd like to read here,
Sure.
just to illustrate how what the industry is actually the opposite of what it claims to be. And I have thousands of these, so I'm just going to read a few. I call this shooters versus defenders. I think this will piggyback well off of what we were just talking about with the bill drill. Okay. Shooters work with set patterns. Defenders work with contextualized variability. Shooters, there's no context. Defenders, there's context. By the way, there's a difference between contextualized decision making and generic information processing. Call target with shapes and colors and numbers is generic information processing. Your mind isn't learning the things it needs to learn as it would learn in a contextualized environment. So you're actually preparing students for the wrong fight when you do that. Shooters work in a pre-choreographed environment. Defenders work in an unchoreographed environment. Shooter's environment is predictable. The defender's environment is unpredictable. Shooter's environment does not include contextualized decision-making or combatives, and the defender's world does. The shooter's world is standardized, which is crazy because violence isn't quantifiable, it's unstandardizable, and it's completely arbitrary. And defenders work in an unstandardized environment. Shooters work in a linear world, and defenders work in a non-linear world. The shooter's world is outcome-based. The defender's world is performance-based. You want to have good outcomes? Focus on better performance, right? Adapt it to the student and what their unique set of attributes and what their unique set of circumstances are, and they'll have better outcomes. Shooters are learning from presenters. Defenders are learning from coaches. Shooters are working in an unrealistic, fantastic reality, and defenders are learning to deal with reality itself. There's a high level of failure, by the way, but failure is a biological requirement for competence to occur. So everyone just wants to look good in practice, and what we encourage our students to do is to train ugly. The uglier you train, the better you're going to perform in reality. It doesn't mean that we're not working on refinement, but we're not out there trying to look good. We don't train to win necessarily. There are times and places to do that, but we train instead to get better. So there's a big difference.
You know, if someone has big enough ego to tell the story how good he looked at the end of the fight or whatnot, in that case, you can use the quote from one of the other coaches in the industry that said, "End of story. One story. End of story." If you win the fight, you can tell your story how beautiful you looked and how that spinning back kick finished the fight. Just make sure that you can do it, because if you don't focus on your process and you're trying to achieve that perfect outcome, you're probably gonna be quite disappointed. Quite
There are
disappointed.
no two shootings that are the same. So the instructors that like to talk about the shootings that they were in, what does that have to do with the shootings that your students are going to be in? Maybe they did everything wrong and they just got lucky.
You
Right.
know,
And so somehow therefore, or maybe they did everything. Maybe they fucked up so bad that they actually had to get in the shooting and they didn't know how to avoid the conflict or de-escalate the conflict or deter the conflict to begin with. And they went to a level of force that wasn't necessary
you
because
know,
they didn't possess the intermediate skills to deal with it.
I look at the notes sometimes you post from Greg Nelson, his handwritten on the whiteboard
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And to me, it's like, you know, people come up to you and they go like, "Hey, I'm a 60-something-year-old salty man. I've been a biker. I've been this and that." And then they start naming their singular experience. This one time I was stabbed. This other time, the guy came up to me with 3 rotten bananas and tried to plug all 3 holes, and so on and so on. And I go like, "Cool story, bro. What did you learn from it? What is the experience that you're able to extract on the principal level from those singular experiences that now is transferable knowledge?" And it's actually, you can connect the dots and show it to your students, to your friends, to your family members. Go like, "Look, this is where things get mixed up. This is where you need to have this attribute to be able to perform this, and in order to perform this, you're going to need to work on this. So you start reverse engineering instead of just
That's
looking at
right.
singular experience and go like,
That's right.
so when I took this stance and when I pressed the trigger of 3.5 pounds, weight trigger with f8 sights on it with 115 grain, this and that, this is what happens, and it happens every time. And you go like, dude, I mean, I really don't know how to explain to you the difference between singular event and then saying that my singular event is what's going to repeat itself thousands of times of all of you guys that going to have a gun pointed at you.
It's never going to repeat itself again. And not only that, you're not the same person at the end of the day that you are at the beginning of the day, right? There's so many variables that are involved just within yourself as a person. So to take a standardized approach where you're stamping everybody out as if they were a robot in a factory that we're going to be performing the exact same thing all the time is absurd. Right. And I get it. I can understand the military application of standardizing things. You have a lot of people, you have to have SOPs, they have to have things, perform as trained. There's a portion of me that can rationalize that to some small degree. It can be better, by the way, it can be better. And I'm guessing the smaller, more specialized teams, they can be more flexible with what their training designs are. In fact, I know some of the people who do that. Same with law enforcement. I can kind of rationalize that to some degree, but the reality is that the more standardized approach you take, the more that you are setting yourself and your students up for failure, especially the Dunning-Kruger effect. I mentioned that earlier. I'm sure your audience knows it, but it's when people of low ability suffer from an illusory superiority. And they believe that they're more skillful than what they are, and they have a metacognitive inability to recognize it, so they can't see how inept they are. And that's when you're setting your students up for all of this false success, you're creating the illusion of competence. And that is, in my view, the most dangerous thing that our industry does. I have people who have come to drop in at our classes here because they see us online or whatever. And for whatever reason, they come and they hand me their resume. I'm like, what is it? What is this? Well, look at all the big names I've trained with. Well, look, they don't have magic pixie dust, but I'll throw them right away in one of the most basic exercises versus live resistance, and they're utterly and completely lost. They don't have the exposure to have the encoding that they need to learn how to self-organize against live resistance. They literally, it's the opposite. They freeze up. It takes them longer to recover and start to solve that problem, if they can even solve it at all, than if they had never done it, because they have repetitions in the wrong direction.
You used very important word that I want to kind of just a little bit, just for a couple of minutes to pick your brain on, and you use the word metacognition, right? And I find it interesting because a lot of the dudes, I don't think they maybe have heard the word, but for some reason, they may have pretty high IQ. They didn't look up the meaning of it. And to me, I go like, yeah, you can take some basic metrics where, you can say, okay, logic solves problems, right? You can say that memory stores information. You can say that, I don't know, speed, I guess it's one of the metrics of processing data. You can say all these facts and go like, I told you the truth, right? But my problem is that, if you don't have that metacognition or ability to track your own thoughts in the real time, as you're thinking, as you're saying something, as you're asking the question, by the way, as you're pressing the trigger, it transfers. You don't have ability to know when to stop. You don't have ability how and when to adapt. You don't have ability to to decide in real time when to change the strategy or the tactics or whatnot. You literally, as we refer to, as you said, and I use that word very often, it's a common core approach to, at the very least, PhD level problems.
Mm-hmm.
At the very least.
At the very least. Yeah. What you're talking about, the term for it is called action capacity. They haven't developed the action capacity, especially under stress, right? When their brain downshifts and defaults to a very primitive mode, and it defaults to the neural pathways that have the most amount of repetition. and it's a really serious problem. And I'm doing the best I can to. I feel like a lone voice in the wilderness. I'm glad to hear there's somebody else out there who sees the things that I do. But it's really it's. I hope that the listeners at home. I hope that you are a part of helping to change this paradigm. And one of the ways I think it's important for us to change it is to stop consuming the false narrative, to stop consuming the false narrative online, to stop consuming the false narrative in person, and to instead start to support and promote the new paradigm, one that's really rooted in moral objectivism, scientific literacy, and semantic accuracy, so that we can. The whole world needs that, but but not the whole world isn't dealing with a life and death topic, as we've already mentioned.
Another thing interesting, you mentioned like semantic accuracy, right? And you have so many of these guys that we kind of referring to without calling names that they will quite often even show off on their bookshelf, Dr. Jordan Peterson's book, and this is the guy who talks that words have meaning, right? But then you listen to these guys talk and you go dude like dude words that you use, they are at best misleading, at best misleading, and not do that. People go I'm developing muscle memory. I'm like, okay, never mind. We're gonna have that conversation on the sidelines, because I'm also developing. I don't know. I'm developing my bones. Empathy, right? Yeah. Okay. Whatever. So when you mentioned, being accurate with your words, with that semantic accuracy and semantic, I would even say precision, and people in our position, just like spiritual fathers in the church, we have different gravity on our shoulders to not be irresponsible to what we say and how we say it. Because people listen to us, maybe not in huge numbers or whatnot, but by definition of, what the way you look at problems, the way I look at problems, and few other people in our industry, I will go on the limb and to say that our students are above average intelligence,
Mhm.
simply by the virtue they came to us.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah.
and our responsibility to be very accurate with the words and try to teach our students to do the same, I think it cannot be overstated.
There's a very popular personality instructor online, who I had a lot of interaction with in the past, and we were both contributors on certain platforms that I walked away from because I couldn't deal with it. You know what I mean. And
I also know who it is.
I saw a post once. Seen many, but I saw this post once of him in full body armor with a can on his pistol. I can't remember what he was wearing, in a smoke filled room with night vision. And then the written post that was coupled with that imagery said, "Welcome to the real world." And there was a big, long, super word salad diatribe about how if you come and train with him, you'll learn to prepare for the real world. And I very rarely do I ever leave comments on social media. It's very rare that I do that. And then most of the time when I do that, it's something positive. And I just asked a simple question. I said, "Can you please provide me with the data that supports this claim?"
Yeah.
He said to me once, you know, and he said to somebody else too, "You're one of those guys that will always tell the truth no matter what." And my answer was, "As if there's any other way."
I mean, by simple fact that we are created by the one who is the way and the truth. The only thing that we can do, and it's to our detriment, is to make a conscious effort not to live the truth and accept the truth, but in no way, shape, or form it erases it. As humans, I think we're inherently drawn to the truth, but most humans have a very much a willful effort to deny it because truth very often is uncomfortable.
I think that we're living in let's just use I think we're living in a time where this is generally true, but I'll say this right now just about the industry, because I don't want to call it our industry, because I think we're outside of it because we're been set apart. But the truth and verified information is perceived with suspicion. And the lie is eagerly accepted because it confirms their bias. And in psychology, it's called a schema. The marketing and messaging and narratives that have been built from the industry over the course of many years, but particularly in I would say the early to mid 2000s is where it started. But before that too, it actually started, the paradigm was actually beginning, but well before that, over the course of the last 40 or 50 years. And by the way, in terms of outdated methodology and pedagogy, I would say that the industry is outdated by 40 or 50 years in terms of the research.
I
But
would agree with you, and actually, I would even say that me coming as an immigrant from former Soviet Union, I can
yeah,
confirm
yeah,
that our training in the old Soviet Union, while there was still Soviet Union, was
yeah.
what I'm seeing here. We were 30 years back then ahead of what it is here.
Yeah, my wife works in surgery. I use this analogy a lot. My wife works in surgery. She does surgery all day long, and she's told me many times and I'm talking about really difficult surgeries, right? And she says, what you do is so much more difficult than what we do because we control the variables and you don't control any of them. She said also what's interesting about that is if how we've learned surgery and how we perform surgery, if it's out of date by 18 to 24 months, then we get sued for malpractice. The stakes are just as high for us as they are for you, but your training methodology is 40 or 50 years out of date,
Yeah.
right? The difference is they have malpractice insurance, right? Like but I think that the analogy is an accurate one, and the whole goal and the whole objective is to bring the industry up to date. And as again, bear with me for repeating again, but unfortunately, because of a schema is a mental model, I use that word. The schema is a lens through which people see things. And people struggle to see things outside of the schema. So the messaging and the marketing has created this schema, this outdated schema, and people struggle with things that are outside of it because it challenges their belief systems, right? And so it's time. It takes people who are willing to come forward to be unpopular and for their own greater good. So I hope that the people watching start to challenge that a little bit and start to educate themselves a little bit so that we can move that paradigm forward. It's imperative.
And that's the thing. That's one of the key things. I don't know, viewers and listeners, if you guys noticed, Todd said challenging that. He didn't say subscribe to his or my views blindly. Start using your brain, start solving problems, look into things even if it's uncomfortable. Like we talked about metacognition, right? It is uncomfortable because it requires, you have to pause instead of react.
That's
you
right.
know you get slapped with a hard truth and you want to snap back because you want to defend something, right? Instead of that, having enough mental discipline to stop yourself and go like, why did I get slapped with this? Why this is so uncomfortable? Why this is challenges everything in me? There's a reason, when people go like, well, I went looking for church and I found this when it feels like home. And I go like, I don't know which home you grew up in, brother, because at my home it was not comfortable. It was chores, it was discipline, and I was always told I fucked up here, I screwed up there, I have to fix this to change that. I'm like, this is the church that I want to be in. When they read the scripture, when Holy Father stands on the in front and he does the sermon, I wanted to feel like he's telling to me, pointing
That's
at me,
right.
going like, "Hey, boy, Stop
That's right.
effing up.
Cognitive dissonance. Jesus himself was up against tradition
Yeah,
and
very much so.
and cognitive dissonance. And what would he say? Knock the dust off your feet. Or they would come to a town or a village where they weren't ready to hear the message. Jesus himself, who was raising people from the dead and healing the sick, walking on water, changing water to wine, he himself couldn't change their mind, and he didn't even try to.
Nope.
So instead, he had a message that was meant to have a filter for those who had the eyes to see and the ears to hear. And that's what we're after. We're after that small percentage of the population that actually makes a change. And it's about 3% of people who have the ability to think critically and do anything about their critical thinking, that to seek the answers to the questions that they have and then actually do something about the answers that they find.
I agree with your numerical assessment because at first when I started traveling this route about 20 some years ago, I still had that thing, like I really want to be liked by everybody.
Yeah.
And then when you start speaking about these things, you find that 80% of people actually severely dislike you. But just like in the court, in the courtroom, they, because maybe you presented a good case and they have nothing to say about your case, but they will attack you personally.
Yep. They will. They'll attack the messenger. It's the war on truth. What you would probably know? You probably know this better than I do, and I always butcher his name. But the famous Greek philosopher Heraclitus, who talked about out of 100 men,
Yes.
10 are just targets. 80 shouldn't be there. 9 are the real warriors, and we're lucky to have them, for they make the fight. But the one is the one who brings everybody else home. That's really what we're talking about, and our message, I believe, is really geared toward that the top 10, 3 to 10, 10 to 3%. And that's not a slight on the other 90%, but they have their role in the world too, right? Not, better than I do that the overwhelming majority of the military is in a support role. They're not all out there in the field doing that stuff because they're just not built for that. And so that's who my message is for. I'm not selling cotton candy. I don't want the masses. I want the ones who have it in their DNA, who were born to protect the flock and look after others. And that's a very small percentage of the population. And I think I could wage a pretty good scientific argument that those are also the critical thinkers.
I agree. I agree. And
It's Plato's cave.
I tell you what, on the personal note, it's personal note is kind of refreshing to speak to the dude that I've never met. I saw, as I said, I started seeing your stuff on the social media. It was actually through and I don't know if you're still connected in any way, shape, or form, but for a while there, you were doing things with Paulo Rubio. You
No,
know, okay.
no.
So I saw back in the day when you were, I
Yeah.
saw some of the stuff out there, and then I kind of every now and then I would see stuff from you coming through social media and all that, and I'm like, oh, okay. So to me, it's refreshing to within my circles, people that come and train with me often, and I have different programs. I have a lot of lifetime students that basically sign their life away to train for a lifetime until the day I die or they die, whichever comes first. And in that circle, it's very challenging, but it's also very rewarding because it's. I mean, I feel fucking alive. My brain is challenged. My brain works. I do have uncomfortable questions that kind of put me on the back foot where I go like, actually, let me hit rewind button on this. I have to analyze this stuff. People don't ask questions that is, hey, confirm what I think. And so to actually talk to the dude that you know never trained with or never met in person, but does kind of
I
seems
hope
like
I
seems
hope
like
that we
follows the
change
same
that.
direction.
I hope that we change that. I hope we get a chance to spend some time together.
I hope so. Somebody already here asked a question. They go like, "So when is Todd coming to Jacksonville, Texas?" I don't know. We haven't even touched on that topic with Todd yet, but God willing, who knows? Maybe someday, whether it's Jacksonville, Texas, or somewhere else. You in Minnesota, correct?
Yeah, I'm just outside of Minneapolis.
Okay, okay,
So I'm in
yeah,
ground zero. I'm in ground zero.
yeah. I hear you. I hear you. Uh, It's slightly colder out there probably right now than it is here.
Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. All right, Todd. I don't want to hold you too long from your spouse and your family and your other things. We already been on for approaching close to 2 hours, which is a good chunk of time. I think people from the comments that I'm seeing, people are going like, "Okay, damn, this actually you cannot listen to this in the background. It's actually kind of like reading Ayn Rand or scripture. You actually have to pay attention, or listening to Tool. You cannot have it in the background. You actually have to immerse yourself in it. But that was my goal. That's one of the reasons why I want you to have you on, because again, without knowing you personally, I'm like, okay, this is the brain that works, this is the brain that thinks, and this is the brain that's not packaged by industry. And I enjoy seeing that. It's really refreshing. It's really cool. And where people would find more information about your training, and I have the on the ticker down there going your website and everything.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
But
Yeah.
what kind of training do you offer to the public, or if it is something that they have to reach out directly to you to get into some of that stuff? Shoot some of your plugs, what you would want people to know.
Thank you. The first thing that I would be honored if people would follow me on social media. Todd Fossey on Facebook, on Instagram, on TikTok. I just got onto TikTok like a week ago. And what's the other one? I forget what the other one is. And then we also have Integrative Defense Strategies on all social media. And as Sonny knows, I'm constantly posting educational and training content. Coming out on January 15th, I have something coming out called Beyond the Gun Reels with Todd Fossey, where they're about 90-second clips on these topics, just to kind of help to expose the public to more and more of it. And it's all like just raw science stuff. But I hope it's done in a way that's catchy and entertaining, but not compromising at the same time. Compelling. I hope you find it to be compelling, not entertaining, because we're not entertainers. Poor choice of words. And then my book comes out in 2026. Keep an eye out for that. I'd be honored if anyone would read it and leave a review. That would help.
What's
Same with Sonny.
what's the title of your book?
I'm not gonna say the title yet, because I know what people will do some of my enemies will do if they know what the title is ahead of time. So I've learned. I hope that the audience understands just how diabolical this industry is.
Oh,
That they'll literally try to destroy you and destroy your life, not just try to compete with you in an underhanded way. They'll do that too, but they'll literally try to ruin you as a person.
mhm.
In ways that you can't even imagine. It's that bad. It's not. You can tell from what Sonny's. It's not. That's not an exaggeration. So I hope that you understand that. So that's why I'm not saying the title yet.
Okay.
And then, if you're interested in becoming an instructor in our instructor development program, by the way, it's a 5-year program. It's not a check the box thing. It's extremely comprehensive. You message me on Facebook, or you can go to the thisidids.com, and you can leave a message there, and we'll set up an interview with you, and we'll start the process if that's something that you're serious about. We have an online training program called IDScitizendefender.com. If you're interested, it's more limited when we're doing things online, but you got to get a taste for some of the things that you can do yourself at home or with training partners. We have a school community also. IDS, it's SKOOL school/IDS on school. It's a really great community that we have going on there. So yeah, I'd be honored if anyone would give us a follow. And then I do a lot of conferences and seminars and things like that as well. So keep an eye out and come up and say hello.
Very cool. Do you attend any of our industry trade shows, like SHOT shows and things like that?
I used to. I don't anymore. I think probably for the same reasons that I can see your reaction. I have a lot of people messaging me right now asking if I'm going to be at SHOT Show this year, my answer is just no. And by the way, my good friend and sister in Christ, Rose Namajunas, is fighting in Vegas that weekend, and I'm going to
Oh,
be there. So I'll be there, but I won't be there for SHOT Show. I'll be there to support her. So if you guys are UFC fans, that's the first Paramount event for UFC. It's a huge card. Say your prayers for Rose and tune in to root her on.
who's the main card on that event?
Patty Bimblett
Oh, Patty,
is
Patty.
Patty Bimblett is fighting. I'm just drawing a blank on his name right now. Justin Gaethje. That's the main event, but there's 3 title fights that night.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, that sounds like pretty good ticket there. Sounds like pretty good ticket.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Sonny. Thanks for asking.
All right, Todd. Listen, man, I really appreciate your time.
Same.
I'm glad we're able to arrange this long time coming, as it says in one of my favorite band's songs. By that band is Tool, by the way. It's been a long time coming. We have some friends in common. One of them, Bart Stewart, is on here, and he just keeps typing and typing and typing. And that's Bart, you know.
Much love, Bart. Much love.
He's like that. So he was very ecstatic that we finally gonna talk because he trained with you and with myself. So he's like, dudes, you should do things and this and that. And I'm like, Bart, at our own pace, when God wills, if He wills, we'll find the way.
Bart, reach
So
out to me. Bart, reach out to me soon so that we can catch up. Do you mind if I say one last thing, Sonny?
sure, go ahead.
There's a good chance that if you're watching this, that you're not a normal person. That you probably have never fit in anywhere. Your mind is different. You think at a higher level. You think faster than others. You're a nonconformist. There's a good chance that that God literally put it in your DNA structure to watch over the flock and to protect the flock and to defend innocence, and to defend truth and to defend justice. And I hope that you embrace that, and I hope that you are publicly demonstrative about what you are, because the world has done everything that it can to demonize us and shame us out of what the Lord has created us to be. And when you do that, when you walk in the purpose that the Lord has given you, you will unconsciously give others permission to do the same. And that's how good wins. And that's how God wins. He wins through us. And we're not, what's the word I want to use? Let's just say it this way. We're not like other people. And I want you to honor and embrace what God has created you to be, because at the end of the day, it's going to come down to you. Everyone around you is going to look to you for the answers to understand what's going on in this world. And there's going to be a lot of big changes happening probably very soon. And you're going to be the one that's going to be the salt and light that's going to lead us through this very difficult time that we're looking down the barrel of right now. So let everyone know that that's why you're here, and then help those others that don't know that they have it in them to do the same, be what they were meant to be too.
Very well said, brother. Very well said. I definitely appreciate that. Folks, please follow Todd on all of the social media platforms. IDS, Todd Fossey, all there. You do have YouTube channel, I believe, also.
Yeah, Integrative Defense Strategies YouTube channel. Yep.
Yeah. So, folks, subscribe, get some viewership going, get yourself some good information. I'm pretty open with my students, looking at what Todd does. I go like, no, we don't do the same thing. Let me paraphrase it. We don't do it the same way. But to me, like we talked earlier today, it's such a rare occurrence for somebody to actually not be afraid to lose the popular appeal in order to keep telling the truth and not bullshit, to gain some kind of a social media clout and followers and likes and that kind of stuff. To me, that's refreshing. it's, if I was younger, I would say it's balls and cojones. Now I just say that that's following the path. That's what we're meant to do. That's what we're meant to do.
Well, the honor's been mine. I've been on hundreds of podcasts, and this has been by far the most authentic podcast I've ever been on. And trust me when I say it's my honor, and it's been more refreshing and comforting for me to be with you and with your audience than you know. So thank you very much.
I appreciate that, Todd. Folks, thanks for being here. We thank you for your time. If you have questions for Todd or myself, find us. God willing, this is not going to be the last time we're going to have Todd on our podcast, because I think I already know that I'm probably going to write down a few deeper tunnels to go down, deeper rabbit holes. And I think that would be a compelling and conversation that you're probably going to need to have some Tylenol or some kind of headache medication sitting by, because you will have to be attentive. Todd, thanks for being here, brother. May God bless, and everyone else, thank you as well. This has been episode number 27 of Let Us Attend from Gospel of Violence podcast, and we will see you next time. This has been Sunny Puzikas from East Texas. Peace.